Thank you, Laura, and what up, Congress? Welcome to Day 3, Session G-21, Marketing versus Mission. My name is Waja, and it is my absolute pleasure to be standing here at AFP Congress 2018 to talk a little marketing with all of you. Over the next hour and a half, we're going to go through a few things. We're going to start by talking about the role of marketing and where marketing fits within the nonprofit organization. The reality is that for many organizations, large and small, marketing is often kind of in its nascency. It's new, it's fresh, and it's in its formative years. It's finding its place within the organization so that it can reach its full potential. So we're going to dive into a bit of that. Then we're going to talk the ethics of marketing. A little bit about how we tell our marketing stories, and more specifically, how we tell our marketing stories in a way that does not exploit our population. The reality is that many of us deal with tragic, sad, and horrible stories at times. And we become the curators, the caretakers of those stories. And the way in which we tell those stories has a long-lasting impact upon our population. And so we have a duty of care to do that well. Lastly, we're going to get a little tactical and talk about how we actually find the stories within our organization and then translate those stories into strong marketing content. So, within that, let's start by talking a little marketing. Now, like I said, marketing in many organizations, in many nonprofit organizations, is in its infancy. It's a thing that organizations maybe haven't distributed funding or invested in intentional storytelling, or otherwise they haven't really considered where intentional storytelling fits into their organization. And so when it happens, it kind of starts at the basics. It becomes a support tool for fundraising. And that is super important. That's a super important piece of what marketing and communications does for an organization. Now, when I talk about a support tool for fundraising, what I mean here is that you have what we can consider immediacy marketing. Donate today. Come to my event, come to my gala. I need you to buy tickets to this event, or this raffle, or this lottery. And all of that is important, because it plays a huge role in how we collect engagement and get people to buy into the things that we do. But there are a lot of other opportunities for marketing to be used, marketing and communications to be used effectively within an organization. Marketing, in and of itself, is a loudspeaker. It's a way to translate your message to more people more often. Storytelling has been something of a theme at this year's Congress 2018, and it's going to be a theme for this presentation. Because marketing and communications as it exists today, be it through email, social media, or otherwise, gives us unprecedented access to a huge audience. In the past, organizations may have been limited by the geography of their operations. And that's geography on two levels. Who they're capable of reaching through direct mail or otherwise campaigns, and also a circle of relevancy around them. If you operate exclusively in Canada, theoretically, you can only reach Canadians, and only Canadians may care about you. But the reality is that what we need to consider now is that with marketing's ability to access a truly globalized and connected audience, we have a huge opportunity to connect to a lot more people more often with unique experiences. Organizations like UNICEF and Charity Water have used tools like VR to give people intimate experiences into the lives of their populations and how people are able to connect more deeply with those populations more often. That's marketing as a loudspeaker. Marketing is also a recruitment tool, and this goes beyond donors to touch on your community of supporters. All of the volunteers, the people who give of their time and give in-kind gifts to be able to contribute to your organization. And we should all be using marketing in a way that allows us to tap into what is often a huge resource for many nonprofit organizations beyond the scope of the people who give specifically of their wealth. It's, of course, donor acquisition and cultivation. It's opportunities to collect with more donors in more places more often, to tell your story more effectively, not just in the position of an ask, but also in a way that lets people buy into who you are, what you do, your mission, your vision. It's community of engagement. All of us have a community of supporters that exists around us. That encompasses our volunteers, our staff, the caregivers of our population, whoever that population happens to be. And oftentimes those people want to be engaged beyond the scope of a monthly, annual, or major gift. They're looking for new ways to get more intimately involved in your population's lives and ways to make their lives better. And that's specifically important when there's an emotional connection between the person within that community and your organization. Somebody 3 or 4 steps removed may want to do more than give a monthly gift or give an annual gift. And so through marketing, through communications, we create communities that allow people to find and even innovate new ways to connect with our organization. It's, of course, branding and profile building. And that's a lot of what we're going to talk about today. How we tell our stories in a way that showcases the very good work that your organization does. Think about this in a way as how we make our nonprofit the Crest toothpaste of nonprofits. People look at a toothpaste brand or a car brand and they immediately have a sense of value, who that organization is, what they bring to the table. And that's something that we all need to establish. In the past, and even in the present for some organizations, the primary person who's telling the story and building that brand and that profile of a population are humans like myself. Humans and fundraisers like many of you who are standing up in front of groups of people, in front of a single person at an event, telling the story of your population. And that's important. But the thing is that with marketing and communications used well, we can now scale this to reach a far greater audience and hopefully build a world in which before we even go out there to solicit fundraising or to connect with an organization directly, we have more people coming to us more often. And that's one of the big opportunities when it comes to very intentional marketing and storytelling. It's stewardship. The way in which we tell stories to the world is an opportunity to steward our donors. Different donors have different methods by which they want to be recognized for the good work that they do for your organization. With tools like social media specifically, we now have a means to tell the world, if that's what they want, about the good work an organization does, a brand does, or an individual does with your organization and with your population. It's a stewardship method to show the world the good work that a person has done in a way that allows them to grow in recognition through their peers while simultaneously telling more of the story of your population. And then, of course, summing all of this and bringing us to the crux of what we're going to talk about today is storytelling. Now, I want to talk about storytelling for a moment here before we dive deeper into kind of the power of stories and the ethics of storytelling. Because see, the story of your organization is multifaceted. And what I mean by that is that the story of an organization isn't simply this organization was founded in 1983, it did a lot of good things, it's helped a lot of people, and it still does a lot of good things today. Currently, we've impacted X number of people within our population, and we're going to impact X number more, but there is still a need, and it's this number of people. That's the basics of storytelling for an organization of any kind. The story of your organization also isn't limited to the population itself. Over these last 3 days, or 2 days, I've heard a lot about, we struggle to find stories. And we are going to touch on that, where those stories can come from, so that you have a wealth of stories that you can access, even in the case where some organizations work with vulnerable populations that they can't show to the world. We're going to talk about that, because there are opportunities and options for storytelling when you can't actually show your population. And a lot of that comes down to the fact that the story of an organization isn't limited to the history of that organization and isn't limited to the story of individual members and groups of their population. Your story is built up of the stories of every single person who is impacted by your organization, from your frontline staff all the way through to your IT, all the way through to the extended family 3 places removed from the population that you serve. And storytelling really is how we get our message out there, because stories are powerful. Stories have been used throughout time to translate everything from, bedtime stories to the origin and history-based stories to recipes and directions. Before we had written language, we had storytelling. We had the way that we translated ideas, information, emotion, content to other people. And so when we're looking at storytelling, we have to recognize that storytelling is powerful. You can't see it, but right now an arrow just faded in between the 2 brains. And that arrow is an indication that storytelling is how we translate information from our mind to the minds of every other person around us. It's how we connect with people in order to let them buy into the stories that we are telling the world. I'm not sure. It's fine. In Yuri Hassan's, Laura, if we could just make these people up here. It's fine. In Yuri Hassan's 2016 TED Talk, he talked about how the brain waves of the listener and the brain waves of the storyteller actually synchronize when one hears a story from another person. And that's important, there is a quote that should be up on the screen, but in lieu of that, I'll read it to you. To our surprise, we saw that all these complex patterns within the listeners actually came from the speaker's brain. When a person is telling you a story, we, the listeners, the audience, connect with that story. We become aligned with that storyteller. Now, of course, every situation that you're going to be operating in won't have a person like myself or like any of you up in front of a group of people telling a specific story. But we can still tap into the power of storytelling when we build out the way in which we tell the story of our organization and our population in order to translate our ideas, our emotional content to them. Because that's what we want. We want empathy. We want emotion. Should I be waiting or keep going?
All the screens in all the rooms just went out, so they might have to do a big reboot. So just
that's cool. I will simply describe what is on the more visual slides for the time being.
Yeah.
All good, all good. The thing is that we have a duty of care when we tell our stories. When it comes to storytelling, it's not enough just to tell the story of a population. There is a balance that takes place. A balance that balances two main things: aid and ambassadorship. We have a duty of care to our population because, there it is. Oh, just in case you want to see. See? Look how solid that fade was, right? I mean, I'm just saying. I thought that was like the cleverest transition in this deck. But yeah, we're good now. We have a balance. I really just wanted you to see all the transitions that I missed. We have a balance, and we have a need to balance aid and ambassadorship when we tell the story of our population. Because the thing is that more often than not, we are talking about, and the population doesn't have to be humans when we talk about this. It's all living creatures. There is a balance between aid and ambassadorship in how we go about telling the story of our population, because in many cases, that population doesn't have the resources or the ability to tell their story themselves. And under that model, we become the curators and the caretakers of the stories of the people that we tell. We become their voice. And so we have a duty of care to tell that story well. Our duty of care to provide aid to our population is based on the good work you provide. That's aid. It's any sort of support whatsoever that you give to your population to, in the process of the work that you do, make their life better. Ambassadorship is how we talk about our population. And ambassadorship plays a huge role, because how we talk about our population becomes, especially if marketing is done well, becomes the story that the rest of the world understands about that population, whoever that population happens to be. In a circumstance where our population cannot talk about themselves, cannot tell their story to the world, how we talk about our population shapes public perspective. Especially if marketing is done well, especially if we're tapping into the power of things like social media. We can reach hundreds of thousands of millions of people very easily and relatively cheaply. And with that sort of quantity, we're putting ourselves in a position to really tell the story of an entire population, whoever that population happens to be and however that population is defined. And that's a dangerous thing. It's a valuable thing for us because it means we can tell a compelling story that connects with many people, but it's a dangerous thing because a story told poorly can also have great adverse effects upon a population. And that brings us to the problem with problem-based marketing. Fair warning, a couple of these images are a bit tragic and maybe a little upsetting in advance. Apologies if that is the case. But I'm going to start with these. Now I know the Africa example of bad marketing is one that has been around for literally generations. The Africa example is something that is often held up as an example of horrible marketing. And that is because, and the reason I start with this, even as it might seem like low-hanging fruit for this conversation, is because it is the best example of the worst kind of marketing a nonprofit can do. And at the same time, this imagery is so ubiquitous within our marketing world, even as it might be less frequently used nowadays. It's so ubiquitous and so thoroughly seen within the world of marketing right now that it has painted this vision of Africa as this single country populated by a single group of people who all look the same and all face the exact same issues. I'm South African, and I look nothing like the people in these images. Africa is a continent of, I believe, about 52 countries, of people facing diverse ranges of issues that are also faced by many other places in the world. If you Google poverty, the first thing that comes up are images of Africa. I know because I tested it before I came here. Some of the first things that come when you Google poverty are images of Africa. But poverty isn't limited to Africa. Poverty isn't limited to any one place in the world, nor is hunger and starvation or war. These are things that exist around the world. But poor marketing paints Africa as the poster of these kinds of challenges. I'm going to quote a 2009 article, and I apologize in advance for potentially butchering this name, featuring Kenyan writer and TEDx speaker Binyavanga Wainaina, who mentioned in that article that he wondered how many investment dollars that might have been placed in a Nairobi business were placed elsewhere. Because images like this, prevalent images like this, paint Africa as a place that would be a really poor investment. But Africa isn't the only example. We see tragic imagery when we talk about poverty. I'm sure that one was posed. There's no way that kid was just walking around with that presumably empty piggy bank. I'm like 100% certain that this is a posed image. I mean, I don't even know where you get a piggy bank like that. You see it when you talk about refugees as well. Tragic imagery. And the thing is that I'm not saying that we should never show this to the world, because these are real problems that are happening. The challenge is that when this is everything that we show to the world, anyone shows to the world, when we cherry pick the most tragic pieces of a person's life and make that the narrative that exists for an entire population, then that story becomes the only story. And the writings on the wall when we think about different subjects, what does poverty look like? What does starvation look like? What does famine look like? What does war look like? What does sick children look like? Sick children, when you think sick children, you maybe think of something, oh wait, I'll get back to this in a second. You maybe think of something like this. You maybe think of something like this. And the thing is that when we think about this tragic imagery, when we think about quote-unquote poverty porn, we don't put ourselves in a position to believe that this still happens right now. We see it as a thing of the past. But I want to show you a video from a 2016 Red Nose Day campaign by Comic Relief.
It's quite odd because I'm on a beach and you can hear the waves crashing, and you would assume that hot by the beach would be paradise, but this is far from it. I've never felt so on edge in anywhere that I've been in my entire life.
Across Africa, millions of the world's poorest children don't even have a bed to sleep in. They're hidden away in any crevice they can find.
This is obviously where they sleep every night. I can't process this. They're so tiny that you do see them in the day and they're kids and they're running around, they're playing football and dancing, and then you come here on the beach and there's loads of adults smoking, and there's just these two tiny little things sleeping in the boat around all that in the middle of Liberia's worst slum.
This is JD.
How long have you been living on the streets?
So, in our phone, I'll be living here. I'll be here.
What happened to your mum and dad?
I'm doing a pull out a mama. My father, and when I was from home, I'll be on school, go to school.
What do you want to be when you're older?
I'll be president.
You want to be the president? Sick. I like that. What would you do if you were the president?
I'd prepare our pay, school for Ipone, I be feeding it, I get them money to buy food for the children.
You're a definite fork in the road. If JD goes to school now, he will learn, he will exceed, but like a couple more years like this and I think that's it. Like he's already quite shut off from the world.
Once we're done here, we're going to pack up the camera and these guys are going to be sleeping in a canoe at night with a lot of dangerous people about, wake up in the morning and try and fend for themselves.
This is the really harsh reality for street children here and across the world. As you're tucking your children into bed tonight, children like JD are huddling together, sleeping outside, in danger and very, very vulnerable. They really need your help tonight. Please give what you can.
Just for tonight. Hold on.
Leaving JD and those kids there was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do.
Really does not feel right leaving. That's all. Yeah, I mean the only thing we can do is help them, which we should. My natural instinct is to just put them in a car and just take them and just put them somewhere in the city and put them in a hotel until we can get them sorted. Can we do that? Please, can I take them and stay in the house until we get them into school? It doesn't matter how much it is, we'll just get them in. Even if it's 5 minutes, we'll get them in the house and but with an older person to look after. Because that's the problem, they're so little that... Yeah, I don't think we should go until that's sorted. Alright. We'll give you something to stay tonight, yeah? These kids, you give them an education, you give them hope. I think that's the main thing. I don't even think it's just a financial thing. I think it's just someone saying you can be this and fulfilling a promise. And I know these Red Nose Day appeals are meant to be we make a case for a child and that tugs on your heartstrings and then you donate because you want to help a child out. But I can't. I mean, I think everyone here who's filming agrees we can't leave this place without sorting these kids out. So we are going to sort these kids out. But these kids are just 5 in a million, 2 million, 5 million. There's so many kids that are in the same situation with these kids. It's really, really important that you donate so we can get these kids off the street and into a school and give them a future.
So there's a lot there. There's a lot there that shouldn't be there. There are a lot of really nice long shots of Ed Sheeran over Ed Sheeran, what I presume is Ed Sheeran's music, so I mean, shameless plug right there. There's a really anemic expression of what the challenges in Liberia are. Apparently, they're just bringing someone rich to put the children in a house and give them hope. But I think what bothers me, personally anyway, the most about that video is the imagery of the kids sleeping in those canoes. And for many reasons. Because see, for that imagery to be generated, to find that, I feel like there must be only a few options. Maybe there are more, but here are the options that I come up with. They went around looking at the beaches, happened to see a bunch of kids sleeping in canoes, and just decided to film them. They asked a bunch of kids, where do you sleep at night? They told them where, and then they went and they filmed them. Or they got consent from the kids and then told them to pose like they're sleeping in the canoe, and then they filmed them in order to solicit fundraising support for this Red Nose Day campaign. Now, the nonprofit watchdog SAIH actually called out this video as the most offensive campaign of 2016, in part for the imagery shown within that 3 or 4 minute video. The thing is, with imagery like this, we heard verbally that these kids, they play soccer, they dance, they laugh, but we don't see any of the hope that exists in their life. Even though apparently the mission is for the hero of our story Ed Sheeran. I have actually nothing personally against Ed Sheeran, for the record. I mean, I'm just gonna put that out there because I'm hearing myself, and it sounds like I have something against Ed Sheeran. I do not. Ed Sheeran's fine, but this campaign is not. And celebrity endorsements have been used often in order to solicit fundraising support quickly, because it works. Showing a celebrity saying that something's a problem rallies support, but not always, or not even often, because of the problem, but because of the celebrity. It's a long versus short-term perspective, and there is a cost-benefit analysis that they'll get into in a sec. My point here is that this imagery isn't as far removed from our lives as we'd like to think. Marketing in the nonprofit space has gotten better. Storytelling in the nonprofit space has gotten better, and I truly believe that it has gotten better than it used to be. But it's not perfect. This was only 2 years ago. And still, when we think of a tragic thing that's happening in a population's life, like children, we do think of things like this tragically lit hospital room. Or this sort of imagery, which I'm also pretty sure was posed. It had stock in the title of the URL. But what we don't think of are things like this.
Ronald McDonald House is our place like home. We've been here now for 6 months, and if we didn't have the Ronald McDonald House, I don't know how we would be able to be here with Adesha. We would have to be separated. It's great that we can all be under one roof together. Thank you for supporting Ronald McDonald House. Thank you for keeping our family together.
See, you know what I love? You know what I love about that video? What I love about that video is it is a perfect expression of balance. You see a kid there who's clearly facing some sort of a challenge. There's a challenge that exists in their life, and you hear a family express that they have faced a challenge in their life that, in this case, Ronald McDonald House Charities Toronto helped them overcome. But what do you see? Do you see a lot of images, or exclusively images, of kids in hospital beds? Of kids showing the illness? Do you see a lot of doctors? What you see is family. What you see is laughter. What you see is a child getting a chance to just be a child, like every other child out there. For a long time, we've looked at, and by we, I don't necessarily mean the people specifically in this room, but the collective we, have looked at tragic imagery as the route to elicit giving behavior. But there are other options. At the core, what we're looking to generate is empathy. We're looking for a way to stimulate empathy within our audience that will facilitate giving behavior on some level. And there are 2 types of empathy, primarily. There's cognitive empathy, and there's emotional empathy. Cognitive empathy is how well we perceive and understand people's emotions. I look at a person, they look sad, or I understand that a sad thing has happened to them, so I'm like, okay, they are sad. I understand this thing. But I don't actually connect with it. There's no response from me to their sadness, or to their happiness, or to any other emotions. Empathy isn't, and this is another misconception, even if it's not a conscious one, empathy isn't limited to feeling sad or feeling compassion when you see a sad thing happen or a tragic thing happen. Empathy is connected to positive emotion as well. So cognitive is how well we perceive. We see and perceive emotion in other people. Emotional empathy is how well we actually affect with others' emotions. We see an emotion, we see an emotional response to something, we hear of an event that happens, and there is a response on some level from us. That response doesn't have to be the exact same thing as the other person, but it's a complementary emotion. You see something tragic, you feel compassion. You see something good, you might not feel like happy specifically, but maybe you feel hope, and hope is also going to be a theme of this presentation. It's the difference between empathetic accuracy and empathetic concern. And now this, empathetic, that's a very small red dot, empathetic concern is really what we want to target when we're looking at generating empathy within our audience. Now, in the past and to a degree sometimes in the present, when we talk about empathetic concern, we think of it from the perspective, or we can think of it from the perspective of, I'm going to show them something sad, that's horrible, that exists in the world, and they are going to respond to it. They in this case are people who have some sort of relative abundance, be it abundance of wealth or abundance of health or otherwise. They live in a country that is not war-torn. So because of that, they empathize with the world in which this is happening to them personally, and so they react to it. The problem is that when it comes to looking at this system, we have a couple of issues with how we go about generating that empathetic concern. Because see, empathetic concern doesn't just come from the standpoint of generating, to be plain, guilt or pity on the part of an audience. Guilt because they may feel like, hey, that person has something that I have something that person does not. I feel a bit guilty about, for example, my privilege in this situation, or my abundance, or my wealth. It's not just about pitying someone. Look how sad that thing is. Because those emotions are infectious. They're also exhausting, and they're also quite negative. Empathetic concern can be hope. We can see a person overcoming a challenge with the help of your organization and feel hopeful. We can see their journey that they've gone through and their struggle, and we can feel gratitude. The difference between those two, which we'll get to in 1 second, is that it's the difference between creating a relationship where a person who feels a negative emotion like guilt or pity gives of themselves, of their time, or their wealth to get rid of that emotion. They essentially pay to feel less guilt. They pay, and paying is time, volunteering, etc., to feel less guilty about something. Hope and gratitude leads to investment because they are positive emotions. People invest in feeling more hope. They want to feel more gratitude. They want to feel more of something positive that makes them feel better. So it's about taking your audience on a journey that facilitates those emotions. When it comes to problem-based marketing, you have both a functional and an ethical concern in terms of how you put together your information and the stories that you tell. Functionally, first and foremost, problem-based marketing, in this case problem-based marketing being a blanket term for negatively focused journeys that take your audience on a negative emotional journey, creates short-term transactional, and it says donor, but it really should say any relationship. Because the transaction in this case is a person giving of their time, their self, or their wealth in order to be rid of a certain emotion that they're feeling. The problem with that is that over time, more and more tragic imagery desensitizes your audience. This is actually something that the author that I mentioned earlier, Binyavanga Wainena, also talked about. This idea that over time, and we see it in media violence research as well, over time people become desensitized to tragic imagery that exists within their world or their sphere, wherever that happens to be. Which means that to generate the same giving behavior, or any behavior really, using tragic imagery over time, one needs more and more and more of the same, escalating in order to generate the same behavior, because the previous imagery that they saw means that the next picture that they see that looks exactly the same will impact them less. And all of us are victims of that, of being desensitized to violence in the world that we live, to being desensitized to challenges based upon imagery that comes not just out of the nonprofit sector, but out of media. All around the world we're seeing imagery like this. And so we become desensitized over time. Even think about walking down the street. I mean, consider for a moment how many homeless people, for example, actually are in Toronto that we encounter walking down the streets, and how many we actually see. Because I know for a fact that I'm guilty of having my eyes just casually skate over the bundle of clothing and things that are wedged into a corner somewhere between two buildings, because we see so much of it. And when we're marketing that, marketing tragedy, we potentially desensitize our audience so that we need more and more and more of it to generate the same response. It leads to what we can call compassion fatigue. Now, compassion fatigue is generally defined as a sense of indifference to the good work, the tragedy that is associated with your cause. It's the same thing. You're bringing up more and more challenges over time, and it desensitizes your audience and exhausts them. Pity and guilt are exhausting emotions. People want to have less of them, and so over time, their ability to feel compassion relative to that becomes fatigued. And then lastly, I mean, there's more, but primarily, lastly, it creates over time a sense of ineffectiveness and hopelessness in your donors. And this is a lot of the challenge when it comes to, I guess, the scale of a problem. Because in a lot of messaging, we tend to talk about scale. Scale not just in terms of this many people reached, but 90% of people with this challenge can't do this. You can change that. More than 5,000 people who do this or have this challenge are still out there right now. The challenge is that if you've asked and you've used this metric once, and then 1 month later, a year later, you come back and that number hasn't changed, your percentage metric is still the same, that looks super ineffective, on your part, actually, as the organization. If it's still 90%, if it's still 80%, a year later, the relationship foundation that you have with your supporters is that if they do these actions, then this will get better. If the next communication over time doesn't actually show that, it makes your organization look ineffective. It makes the problem look insurmountable. And it means that it's something that other people cannot connect with over time. There's also an ethical challenge. Ethically, we begin to lock in a narrative of victimhood, when the victimization of a population is the only thing that we talk about. We paint our populations as victims exclusively. And the word exclusively is important here, because there's nothing wrong with, of course, being a victim. The challenge is that when we tell a story about a population that only becomes a narrative of victimhood, then that's their identity now. That's the identity we've put out into a world about a group of people who may not be able to tell their own story. It perpetuates a sense of othership. Think about the kid in that Red Nose Day video. How well can any of us actually affect with that kid? And not just because of their experiences, not just because they're sleeping in a canoe, because the imagery you painted of them was of long stairs, looking at the ground, and an ability to speak. And this actually was another thing that I had a huge problem with. That they painted the picture of that kid as lacking enough literacy to require subtitles. Where were the subtitles for Ed Sheeran? Right? And yes, I know he doesn't actually need subtitles, but it immediately splits the person that you're seeing away from the rest of the world. We don't expect to need subtitles if we're on a video. Ed Sheeran certainly didn't need subtitles when he was on that video. So it makes the population that you're talking about very other. It makes them something that other people cannot affect with. When you see a sick child and all you see about them is a sick child in the hospital being poked and prodded by doctors, for example, or in a state of sickness, I mean, all you're seeing in that case is an experience that many of us can't affect with. But what we can affect with is family, for many of us. What we can affect with is laughter. What we can affect with is friendship and hope. And so by showing a journey that encompasses those, we make the people that we serve part of the rest of the world, rather than identifying this one group, putting them in this box of, these are victims of this thing. They become part of the world when we talk about the hope in their story. It creates an unhealthy dichotomy of the savior and the saved. And there's no better example of that than the video that we just saw, where there's a very clear distinction between the person who can swoop in and just pay for a house and put the children in it, rather than talking about the true systemic issues that exist within a place and within a population that, in that case, created that system and created that world. It's never quite as simple as things are often painted in these promotional videos. And so when we create promotional videos that make a problem or challenge that exists in the world so thoroughly two-dimensional, we remove ourselves from that problem, making ourselves simply the people to swoop in and save the day. And the problem with that is that oftentimes people who are victims of something or face a challenge, they want to be part of their own solution. And we take that away from them. Any people who do videography or marketing like that, take that away from them. The moment that we position ourselves as, we are the saviors of the day, we swooped in and we saved the damsel. You never see fairy tales where the damsel actually gets to be like, you're really not my type. I don't actually want to climb out of this tower with you. I'm just saying. I mean, you're not really my type. No. It's just like, Rapunzel, let them hear. Sure, okay. I mean, I don't really know you, but that's fine. You know what I mean, right? But it's all the way to the fairy tale world that we live in. The savior doesn't ask the saved what they need. The Savior doesn't ask the saved how they would like to be saved. There's an expectation that the saved will simply be grateful that they're being saved at all. And that's it. That's the story. And all of that together disempowers your population. It puts your population in a position where they are not part of their own narrative anymore. They're simply another character in the organization's narrative, or the person's narrative. That Red Nose Day video is about Ed Sheeran. Everybody else just happens to be there. It could be about, you could take that statement and put it anywhere in the world. It's not about those people specifically. That video is about Ed Sheeran. I still sound like I'm hitting on Ed Sheeran. I really don't mean to. Ed Sheeran, if you ever hear this, you're pretty cool. Perfect's a good song. But that was an imperfect video. And we do a lot of imperfect marketing. And so when we're telling the story of our population, we need to ensure that we are still empowering that population. The reality is, and what we should hope for, is that someday that population will graduate from the good work our organization does. They'll extend outside the organization. They'll grow up, they'll overcome whatever illness they're facing. They'll overcome homelessness with your help, with that good work of your organization. But then we need to think about, how have we empowered them beyond this scope? They're no longer working with us, but is there a stigma to the story that we've told that is now painted upon that group of people? Some people wonder why people continue to deny abuse, which is often manifest to those around them. The answer has to do with the way domestic violence victims fear they will be treated. This is by a legal analyst, media commentator, and longtime prosecutor, Wendy L. Patrick, in How Social Stigma Silences Domestic Violence Victims in Psychology Today. And this is not limited to domestic violence victims. Homelessness, or having been homeless at one time, carries a stigma with it. Teenage pregnancy carries a stigma with it. Being from a war-torn country and being a refugee carries a stigma with it. We don't like to think about it, but that's a reality of the world that we live in. And people don't want that to be their only story. When people portray us as victims, they don't want to ask us about solutions, because people don't ask victims for solutions. Theo Sowa, then CEO, African Women's Development Fund, on We Need the Voices of African Women at TEDx Change. Because this is also a reality of the world that we live in. That when someone is the saved, they don't have a choice in how they are saved. They are simply saved, and should be grateful that being saved is the case. So when we do our marketing, any marketing, there is a cost-benefit analysis that needs to take place. And a lot of that comes down to a question of urgency. It comes down to, how quickly do we need to raise fundraising support versus how much care do we need to show to the story that we're telling for our population? And Judy will talk more about this soon, but that's a question that we should frequently be asking ourselves, because when we're doing our marketing storytelling, there is a need to balance these two. And no matter how urgent the need, that balance rarely weighs completely in the direction of support quickly over showing compassion and showing a respect for the dignity of your population. So when does a story become exploitative? Story becomes exploitative when, in your storytelling, you lock in a victim of victimhood, a narrative of victimhood, perpetuate a sense of othership, create the unhealthy dichotomy of the savior and saved, and you disempower your population. And I'm going to provide a litmus test in a moment that can help, hopefully, all of us determine whether the story we're going to tell falls on the exploitative side of the equation. And remember, this isn't just about, somebody woke up in the morning and decided to tell an exploitative story. Things are urgent. Maybe we're off target. Maybe we need more. Maybe something urgent has happened, and in those moments, that is when we, any of us, can make the error and let the scale tip a little farther to one side. So when does a story become exploitative? When selling your story means selling their dignity. And that is the test that we need to make in terms of figuring out how we go about telling stories that are non-exploitative. So far I've painted a fairly bleak picture of marketing, and marketing in general, and Ed Sheeran in the nonprofit world. I've painted a fairly bleak picture of what, for the record, Eddie Redmayne did one of those videos as well, which was also not great, and Tom Hardy. So I'm just saying, not just you, Ed Sheeran. There is another option, and that option is what I like to call outcomes-based marketing. Outcomes-based marketing looks a little like this. Now this is the same story that we saw the first time from Ronald McDonald House Charities Toronto, but what I want to emphasize here is that the call to action, the need for this video, is different. And that's foreshadowing a bit of repurposing content that we're going to talk about a little later.
It's the greatest feeling in the world, just to be able to watch your child become herself again, to play with kids and to not just want to lie down and sleep all the time. Just to be silly and play hide go seek and slide on slide. Or just even just to run around in the gym here. It's an unbelievable feeling, and it's like nothing I've ever felt before.
And there's your call to action. Your call to action isn't give more so that we can have less of this. Your call to action is give more so we can have more family, more happiness, more hope. So, what's the difference between problem-based marketing and outcomes-based marketing? And my suggestion would be to ask these questions of your content as you produce it in order to produce more marketing based upon positive outcomes. Problem-based marketing focuses on a negative emotional journey. It shows your audience sadness, it generates sadness, it generates guilt, it shows them exclusively tragedy in isolation in order to generate an emotional response and hopefully stimulate giving behavior. It emphasizes the challenge that a population faces, the problems in their lives, whatever those happen to be, and how they are negative and how you, the supporter, in some way, can help them overcome this thing. It focuses on the distance still to go, the continued need for that population, and therefore, the need of your organization. That's the reason that people are giving to your organization. On the other hand, outcomes-based marketing takes people on a positive emotional journey. It shows hope, it shows happiness, it shows family, it shows people overcoming an obstacle that exists within their life. Again, and I keep hammering in on this because it's important to say, it's not about never showing that a challenge exists. It's about showing where people start, but also what they've been able to become, with, of course, the help of your supporters, your donors, and your organization. It's a journey towards hope. It's a journey towards gratitude. It's a journey towards happiness. It emphasizes the growth of your population over time. It emphasizes how far they've come from wherever they started, and how with the help of your organization, with the help of your donors, if you're doing a stewardship video or writing piece, for example, they were able to grow beyond where they were towards where they are now. And it focuses on the distance you've covered, your successes, the good work that your organization has done that have allowed people to have better lives, to allow less elephants to be poached, to allow less of something bad to happen because more of something good happened. And that's the big difference here between problems-based marketing and outcomes-based marketing. In problems-based marketing, people are supporting so that they can get away from something bad, to really simplify this. Problem-based marketing helps people get away from something bad. Outcomes-based marketing gets people to give to move towards something good. Problem-based marketing encourages people to give to move away from something bad. Outcomes-based marketing encourages people to give to move towards something good. And there are organizations that are doing this right now. And with that, I would love to welcome my co-speaker, Judy Noordermeer, to the stage. Judy is the Associate Director of Marketing and Communications at Ronald McDonald House Charities Toronto. I personally have admired the work that Ronald McDonald House Charities Toronto has done on the marketing level for quite some time, but to note, Ronald McDonald House Charities Toronto is not a client of mine, nor is Ronald McDonald House Charities in general a client of mine. We are simply two organizations who believe the best way to market is through marketing outcomes.
Thank you, Mo. So I was thrilled when Mo contacted us about being part of this presentation, because that's a huge endorsement for the type of marketing that we do. I'm here for a professional reason, but also for a personal reason, because I believe in this mission. I have a master's degree in journalism. And something happened in the last semester of my journalism degree, and I was in an ethics class, and the prof asked us to deal with an ethical issue. You've written a story. It's a story about somebody who's done some stuff they probably shouldn't have done. And you're going to run the story next day in the newspaper. And that person who you're writing about, you've done all your work, you've done all your due diligence, that person who you're writing about contacts you the night before and says, if you run this story, you're going to ruin my life. I'm going to kill myself if you run that story. And it sounds really extreme, but there was something about that moment that had a real influence on me. And I thought, and that started this journey of questioning, do I want to be a journalist? Because I was not comfortable with having that power over someone's life. What if I made a mistake in my reporting? How is that going to affect somebody's life? And that started a journey for me of moving away from journalism, still being a storyteller, but not in a journalism context. And what I've learned over my years of being in marketing, of the power that we have, it's different than a journalist, but we still have a lot of power to tell stories that influence people in very significant ways. And I continue to take that very seriously. So let me tell you about the organization that I work for and the problem that we face. Ronald McDonald House Charities Toronto. The problem that we deal with is that 70% of children, 70% of families live outside a city with a children's hospital. So if your child becomes seriously ill, you have to leave home. And seriously ill doesn't mean you're going to be away for a week. You could be away for months. You could be away for over a year. Lots, because of amazing research. More children are surviving than ever before, but it comes at a cost. A lot of the time of they are needing to be away from home for longer periods of time. They have to keep coming back, and they have to keep coming back over years and years. Families are separated for longer periods of time. And we have this wonderful thing in Canada, which is free health care, but not everything is free. And health care, hospital care is free, doctor's appointments are free, but all the other stuff is not free. It's not free to live away from home. It's not free to travel back and forth. How are you going to eat? Where does that money come from? Somebody's got to stay with the kid. Do they have to give up their job to do that? It is very, very expensive in Canada to have a sick child. That's the problem that we're trying to deal with. So what do we do at Ronald McDonald House Charities Toronto? We keep seriously ill children close to their children close to their families and to the care that they need. We have an 81 family house in downtown Toronto, right near Mount Sinai and Sick Kids. And we have 7 family rooms in hospitals across the GTA and in Sudbury that keep families close when they're right in the hospital. So last year, we served 5,139 families. Huge, huge number of families that we serve. So if I was coming at this from a problem-based marketing perspective, what would I be looking at? I'd be talking about the pain that your child's undergoing. I'd be talking about the sadness of families being separated, of mom and dad being away, separated from each other, of a little child being separated from their big sister, their little brother that they just adore and they just need to be around each other. I'd be talking about that hurt and that hardship, the poverty that can impose on you if this is going on, if this is a sustained issue for years and years and years, the stress and homelessness. How scary is that? I could focus on that. But we take it from a different perspective and we focus on the outcomes. So we focus on the hope that comes in these situations, the hope that Ronald McDonald House brings, the resilience of the families, how they are empowered by being together and having that normalcy of being together in a family, of being in an environment with other families where they can share their stories, where they can share their stresses, and they can live together and support each other. The comfort, the optimism that they find and that they can find when they're out of the hospital, when they're out of just that day-to-day care. The fun that you can have at Ronald McDonald House. But more than anything else, what I always want to make sure is that we're telling our story with honesty and authenticity, because that's the best way to communicate. So there's subtitles on here, not because we don't think you can hear the voices of people, particular with the earlier videos where they were from Newfoundland. This is just compliant with accessibility. So this is a story of a family where Mo talked a lot about the balance. We still do have to talk about some of the hurt and the sadness in order to get to the joy, but we don't dwell on it. So you're going to hear that piano music, you're going to see some of those images from the hospital, but you're going to see the rest of what we do. So I'm going to show you this video, then I'm going to tell you a little bit about the background of how we chose this family and what we've done since then.
Lachlan is probably the goofiest person you will ever meet. I don't think anybody really understands him except his little sister. They called the day plastic anemia. By the next day, we were in an ambulance.
I don't think I've ever been as scared in my life.
We were exhausted. Our daughter was still in Peterborough with her grandparents. She had stopped speaking because she wanted her brother so bad. None of us do well when we're apart. We expected everybody to be run down and tired and miserable, and families were laughing together.
We were completely blown away.
Roman got here and immediately lit up. And she started talking, and it was like you could see the stress melt off him the minute she ran to him.
Everybody's there to support each other and help each other.
It was, and still is, it really is our home.
You're together and you're safe.
When you ask Lachlan and Rowan about last summer, they don't tell you about all the stuff that happened at the hospital. They tell you about the fun they had here. Lachlan is doing amazing. He is 1 year post-transplant, and so far his results are beautiful.
And every time we have to come back for a follow-up appointment, he is just so excited that he gets to come back and visit the house.
We expected the worst, and instead, Ronald McDonald House gave us the best. And there can be no better gift to a family struggling than to give them this home.
So the balance there, part of the problem, but really empowering the family with their own words to tell their story. I'm going to tell you how I found this story. We do something at Ronald McDonald House. We bring in a photographer about every 6 to 8 weeks, does family photography for families. Just comes in, families can sign up, get their photos taken. It's one of the ways, occasionally we get some cute images. So this family had signed up for them. They were not on my radar screen at all. But this family, and I got these photos and I was like, man, this family's really, really cute, really engaging with each other, really together. Contacted the mom and just chatted with her a bit, and boy, was she ever articulate. And I thought, you know, I've got this direct mail letter that's coming up, and maybe they'd be a good subject for this, because I've got these great photos. And I started talking to the mom. Turns out she'd studied English. I thought maybe she can write. I said, do you want to write something for me? And she wrote something. I didn't write it. I didn't interview her. She wrote it. And it was beautiful. And it was unbelievable. And I took that letter, and of course I had to do some nuancing on it, and I had to wrap in the call to actions and change some of the references to us and all of that kind of stuff. But that's the first thing we did with them is the direct response the direct response letter that we did there, and that was our biggest one to date, just because there was so much authenticity in it. Then, of course, we converted that into an e-newsletter article. We did some stuff on social media. Every time they were coming back to visit and the photographer was there, they were lining up for the family photos again. They were always coming out so well. So we did social media posts. We put them on the cover of the annual report. We did a video about them, and we had a major signature event earlier this year down at the Mattamy Athletic Center, and we showed this video that I just showed you today, and then we brought the family out to do an update. So that's what you're seeing in the bottom right corner, and this is just one of the ways that we try to, when we have a good story, when it's authentic, when it's really the way that we want to tell our story, we try to use that in as many ways as possible to be efficient. We're not dealing with multi-million-dollar marketing budgets at Ronald McDonald House Charities Toronto, so we have to work with what we have. This is just one example in one family that we've done that with, but it's one of the most enjoyable that I've had the opportunity to do. So that's sort of like a real life example. When you're in your organizations, there's kind of in some ways those three worlds. There's the marketing world, which myself, I inhabit that. There's the programs, people I have to work with, that I love working with, and it's the population that we serve. So my mandate's to find more donors so we can serve more people. Programs wants us to serve more people as well, and then there's the population. What's key, so this is, I'm sort of like bridging into Mo's next part of the presentation, but key to finding those great stories and telling them well is to have really strong relationships across each of those three worlds. Know your programs people. Make sure that there's build relationships of trust with them, because your programs people are often going to want to protect your population. You need to instill trust in your programs people that you're also going to protect your population. And when those relationships across that lateral there are working really well, you're going to get some really strong stories and strong call to actions that are authentic to who you are and that respect the population. Back over to my colleague.
Thanks, Judy. We're going to get a bit practical in a sec and talk about where we find these stories and how we kind of bring these worlds together, bring them into alignment so that we can collect good marketing content and tell our story well. Before I touch on that, I just want to quote that video for a second. When Lachlan and Rowan talk about that summer, they don't talk about the experiences in the hospital. They talk about how much fun they had at the house. And that is outcomes-based marketing in action. The occurrence at the hospital might have been the stimuli that brought them to the house, but for them, the experience that stands out the most, that connects emotionally with them the most, is the hope, it's the fun, it's the family. And that's outcomes-based marketing in action. I love that video. So the question is now, how do we do this practically? And we have this litmus test for outcomes-based versus problem-based marketing. Where do we find those stories? Because a lot of the time, that is the challenge that I've heard, even just throughout these few days. We can't find enough stories. We don't have enough stories. Where do we find our stories? How do we collect our stories? And a lot of that comes down to understanding the priorities that each piece of your organization has, your marketing, your population, and your programs team, and then finding a way to bridge the gap between them through relationship building so that you're able to collect content easily and in an integrated fashion that specifically does not interrupt the programs that you're running. Because that's a lot of the challenge when it comes to the idea of marketing content. Clearly the videos that you've seen today are highly produced. They're produced videos that were built for a specific purpose. There's a huge need and a huge gap when it comes to really, really raw videos that can be captured without a 10-person camera crew, a boom mic, and a big rig, right? Because that's what we think of when we think marketing or production a lot of the time. We think we're bringing a film crew in here, but we have the ability to capture very good marketing content very easily if we follow a few simple rules. But first, let's understand where marketing and programs are coming from in this context. On the marketing and slash development side of things, we have a few goals. I'll talk to marketing specifically because that's much more my experience. Marketing, we want to tell the story of the nonprofit that we work with. We want to get that story out there as multifaceted as it is, as many people as are involved or build up that story. We want to get that story out there into the world. We want to build public support. The best version of marketing you can possibly do is when you don't have to do marketing because people know who you are, they know what you stand for, and they want to be a part of your organization. They want to support you before they even see that first marketing message. But that takes time. That's something that we build over time through producing content that connects us with people who are like-minded, who want to be a part of the organization's story. We want to make our brand a quote-unquote household name. So what this means is that you want to bring your brand to the point where when people think about a children's charity, they think of Ronald McDonald House Charities, or Ronald McDonald House Charities Toronto? Oh, okay. Hi, Jennifer. We get paired later, but right now, I'm gonna have to, don't take this the wrong way, but I am gonna have to ignore this device and politely decline. Okay, well, I appreciate the opportunity. I'm actually engaged, I'm just saying. I appreciate the offer. Hey, we're at Congress, networking, right? Literally and figuratively. We want to make our brand a household name, something people can connect with over time so that they want to support you before they even know anything about what your organization does. They know it already. They don't have to read the tagline. They don't have to read the message. They don't have to read the please give. They already want to give because they know what you're about. And of course, you want to find more donors. The challenge is that a lot of the time, there's a difference between, there's seen as a split between finding more donors and serving more people. The thing is that donors, and it's a bit of a mix, right? Donors help you serve more people, but donors only come to you because you serve more people. Donors don't necessarily come to an organization because they say, wow, that marketing team seems really robust, we should donate to them. That's not the sort, that's not the why. The why is because, or one of the whys, is because people want to help something in the world. And that comes down to serving more people. That comes down to your programs team. Your programs team wants to serve as many of your population as possible. They want to run high quality programs. For the record, I interviewed a programs person, so I'm not just making this up off the top of my head. Run high quality programs, maintain positive relationships within your population, and that's another challenge with marketing because oftentimes a protective program team can see high production as detrimental to the value of the population, creating a world where it almost creates what I think of as the zoo effect. Like you're putting your population on display so that you can generate more giving behavior. And of course, serve more people. A friend of mine that I worked with a bit ago had a great analogy for this. He said, is the puppy wagging the tail, or is the tail wagging the puppy? The puppy in this case is your programs. It's your service of people. And as your programs team wants to serve more people more often, they wag that tail harder. They get way happier. And when that happens, that tail is us on the marketing and fundraising side of the equation, where we're trying to build support to make that puppy happier and healthier. When we run into challenges is when the tail starts wagging the puppy. So the marketing and fundraising side of the equation becomes the reason for doing more marketing and more fundraising. It becomes its own thing. We're doing more marketing and fundraising so that we have more resources to do more marketing and more fundraising. And that's inherently problematic. Because our marketing and fundraising fuels our capacity to run better, higher quality programs. So that's a first step that we need to take. Aligning ourselves with our programs team to ensure that when we're producing content, we're producing it in a way that has respect on both sides. Because on the program side of the equation, they need fuel to run those programs. They need fuel, they need resources. And that's where we all come into play, providing that fuel, providing those resources. Because when those two sides are not aligned, the harm, as Judy touched on immediately, comes down to a measure of trust. If we run poor content that doesn't respect the dignity of the population we serve, over time we erode the trust of your population, who doesn't love how a piece makes them, as a population, or an individual within that population look. We risk losing the trust of volunteers and supporters, who bought into us because of a cause, because of a mission that we are supporting, and if they see an erosion of that, that erodes their trust and their commitment to all of us. And of course of donors, because donors are there for a cause. Now, to note, this isn't intended to be a call out of any organization or any person whatsoever. This is a cautionary tale of what can happen if we do not continue to balance those two things. The need for aid and support and build more aid and support, and the need to be ambassadors for our population over time. And the challenge is that it's not as black and white as to say, suddenly we only do good marketing and it's only ever going to be good marketing. People make slip-ups, and this is simply a way to ensure that less of those slip-ups happen. So, once we're aligned, what do we do next? The first thing to understand is that content is everywhere. One of the challenges is that we don't know where that content is and how to get that content. And when we see highly produced videos like any of the ones we've seen today, that takes resources. Resources that organizations do not always have. Not every organization has the resources to do a multi-million-dollar marketing and brand awareness campaign or bring in a big crew to shoot a massive video. Not every organization has that. The thing is that marketing with new technology has changed so that we are able to access marketing content and collect marketing content very easily, very frequently. The first thing to understand, though, is that that content is everywhere around you. The next step is something that I love that Judy mentioned during her part of the presentation, and that is that they had families line up to sign up to be photographed by the photographer that they brought in. What you're doing through this process, when it comes to collecting content in a way that is non-interruptive to your programming, is a process of normalization. It must be a normal thing for content to be collected. We as people generally, things that are different in our environment or things that change suddenly that have never been there before, they stand out. We're drawn to them. We have that curiosity or that interest or whatever you want to call it that pulls us towards those things. And so when we want to do content collection in a way that doesn't disrupt the programs that we run, it starts with normalizing that content and integrating it. Really, those two should be switched, because once we understand that there is normalization, the next step is making sure that people can actually opt in. If members of your population, like, nobody wants a circumstance where you have a member of your population sitting there and someone just shoves a camera in their face and says, tell me about your life. What we want is to create an environment where people know that this can happen, know that this is happening, content collection generally, and so it's a normal thing. And then give them the opportunity to opt into that content. Yes, I want to be part of the story. I want to be shown visibly, if that's even possible for the population that you serve. Yes, I want to be a part of this. No, I don't want to be a part of this. And make that part of the system. Normalizing that content means that less people are going to be distracted when that content collection happens. This piece is super important. Most great content can be collected with the phone that most of us have in our pockets, or in our purses, or wherever we happen to keep our phone. The iPhone 6s Plus that I use, I don't work for iPhone, but the iPhone 6s Plus has a great camera. The camera's fab. I use it all the time to collect content. And that's content about myself, that's content about Congress, that's content about your population, because every member, well, most members, some members, of your staff and volunteers will have this ability to collect content through their phone. Of course, there are other rules and regulations that should exist around that, where content can be collected, how content can be collected. You likely need a policy of some kind to lay that out. But doing that work means that people can do intimate content collection in the moment and then use that content with their marketing team in order to generate really great videos, photos, etc. I was talking to a friend of mine that works at another nonprofit, and what they mentioned was that when they have a program running, they end up just kind of turning on their phone, putting it on a tripod, and just leaving it running while the program is happening. And then afterwards, they take the phone and they cut out the key moments of happiness, of joy, of hope, based upon the program that they're running. That phone isn't being stuck in someone's face to be like, hey, this is what we're doing, right? How do you feel about this today? Do you want to say a couple of words to the camera? That has a place. Produced video has a place in your marketing mix, but one piece of untapped potential within marketing is that we all carry a high-quality phone with a half-decent recorder in our pocket that can capture key moments, key videos, key photos that, with the right setup, can be shared in order to drive support, to show the real, authentic story of our organization. The best photo is often a candid one. Everybody loves a photo with kids with their arm around each other, smiling and laughing. But the best photos, at least in my experience, are kids or people who are having genuine moments of hope and happiness. And we have the opportunity to witness that and then tell that story. It's when we cherry pick the most tragic pieces of a person's story and make that tragedy the only story about that person or group of people that our marketing becomes exploitative. So we need to find those candid moments to help connect people to the hope that we generate through our work. Your best content lies in the authenticity of your stories. And those stories don't just start with the people that you serve. It's everyone. And at the end of the day, what you want to be doing here is it's all about telling a good story. And your good story encompasses every story of every member of your population that you serve, in order to take the emotional impact of your idea and translate it from your mind to the mind, see, transition, yeah, to the minds of all of the members of your population. Question is, how do you find that? Because again, that's been the question. Where do we find those stories? So this is a diagram that I like to call, I know it's hard to read, but I'll go through each word. This is a diagram that I like to call your orbits of relevance for your organization. Where do you find the stories? The story of your organization doesn't just start with, our organization was founded here and now it's lasted till here. Your organization is built up of the stories of every single person within your population and beyond. At the core of your storytelling is your primary population, the people you serve. Orbits of relevance talks about all of the other people, and this is how you consider it, who are stakeholders in your population's lives. So that's their immediate family, extended family, friends, caregivers, donors, staff and volunteers. This isn't a hard and fast list of who has the greatest stake in your population's life. These are interchangeable depending on the unique circumstances of that individual person. The point is that all of these people have stories. Even staff who maybe didn't just have a deep story and then join your organization, but applied to a job and got in. That doesn't mean they don't have a story. That means that they're building new stories over time. Stories that a year into the good work that they do with your organization, they can tell. And that weave part of the tapestry of the stories that you are telling about your organization. So the first thing you want to do is start by doing an inventory. Who is my population, and who are the people connected to them? Are there doctors or nurses who have an intimate experience? Do they have family who have an intimate experience? Are there friends, even within that population, who have an experience with that person? Do an inventory of those people, and then start with them. And those stories can be anything. They don't have to be like a person talking to the camera. They can be a conversation that you had with a person that was really intimate, and then saying, hey, do you mind if I write that down and turn that into a blog post? Is that okay? And if they consent to that, if they're okay with that casual conversation becoming a piece of content, you have another story. And those stories are everywhere. They're in every conversation and every interaction. But the other question is, what do you do if you cannot show your population? Because that's a big one. because there are vulnerable populations out there that cannot be shown. Real life experience, I was having coffee with a friend of mine who then worked at a shelter for women who have faced domestic violence in the past. There are very clear safety concerns about whether or not you can put a person's face who's gone through something like that on a screen somewhere talking about their experiences. Frankly, you can't. And in cases even working with children, there are times when you can't actually show the child in question. So instead, what I would suggest is you do something that I like to call marketing your negative space. The negative space in a photo or image or anything is all of the region around that person. In this case, all of the people around that person. Again, their caregivers, their family, their friends, all of those people who may not be able to talk specifically to a single person, but they can talk to the experiences of a population based upon their experiences. A counselor who's seen hundreds of people who have gone through all the same thing can have a conversation about how, in generality, those things have affected with them. Those things have connected with them. Marketing your negative space means you can paint a picture of your population, of your subject, without actually showing that population. There are always opportunities to tell good stories. If you can't show your population, show all of the amazing people who surround them and have helped them grow through your organization. And as Judy said, once you have that content, marketing stories are everywhere. And a single marketing story, I mean, we have a temptation nowadays in the world of social media where we post a thing on an Instagram story and it disappears 24 hours later to be like, well, that was a good story. We're done now. I guess I need another one. But the stories we tell are powerful and they have staying power. A 10-minute interview can become a behind-the-scenes selfie. Anyone who has been following the AFP Congress hashtag knows that I love my selfies. Selfies are excellent. It can become articles and blog posts, a 5-minute video that you're putting on YouTube or Facebook. It can become a 1-minute Instagram short that promos the bigger video. It can become a podcast. I love podcasts. Podcasts are fab. Would recommend. The videos and the content that you collect can be everywhere. And they can last for months, if not years. At the end of the day, when it comes to the marketing that we tell, when it comes to the storytelling and the work that we do, our core is to tell a good story. A good story means that it encompasses all of the stories of every person who makes up your organization, from your frontline staff to the behind-the-scenes people who make things happen, to the population, to all of the stakeholders within that population's lives. A good story means taking people on a positive, emotional journey of hope and gratitude, so that the story you tell isn't a story about running away from something bad. It's about running towards something good. I know we have like a minute, but I'll welcome Judy back to the stage and see if there are any questions.